You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hey, everybody. Glad to have you back on board. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, I've got a guest who is a fellow coach, author, and colleague in the same space, if you will. We were commiserating. He lives in the Charlotte area. And as many of you have heard me talk about, I have a very fond place in my heart for Charlotte. I spent some time there in my consulting years. But anyway, I'd like to introduce Dan Roberts. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Doug. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation. As you said, we were having a nice commiserating would probably not be the best word. It would be enjoying conversations.
Enjoyable, yep.
Yeah. I love Houston too. So looking forward to talking today about this great topic in terms of helping leaders common sense.
Yeah, so you, as I alluded, you are an author. You've collected your thoughts and published a book. Let's talk about that book real quick. Give us the title and tell us kind of the executive summary of it.
Sure. The title is Optimize Your Leadership, an Impactful and Healthy Way to Lead in the New Age. And the impetus for the book was when I worked for many years in change management. One of the things we were always working on is how do we set ourselves up for success, set up the company for success, all the different areas we're working on to optimize it so we can actually move the company forward, actually make the change. And then I started applying it to working with individuals and talking about the different things that they can look at in their life and how they think, how they act, how they behave, their emotions, how they approach their work, how they experience their workday in a way that allows them to succeed and keep moving themselves forward.
You know, that domain, change management, is a big one, and I have often talked and written about that. And, just as an example, a big moment of change for so many people was back in the infamous 2008, 2009, the big financial crash. People who had had what you might argue is good, successful careers were being let go by companies. And sometimes they were senior executives. The companies just made cuts, and people for the first time in their life was faced with change that they had certainly not asked for and were not expecting. So it was a very material and obviously for most a very emotional time. And I think that's a lot of the association people have when we think about change. We always kind of bang the drum for, people hate change. And I've come to be not on that bandwagon. I say that change is necessary if we think about it. Just metabolically and physically, our bodies are changing every day, and whether you're changing for the good or heading for the exit, I don't know which your story might be, but change is around us. So I think I've always encouraged people to embrace it and figure out how to optimize it rather than fight it.
Absolutely. And anybody that's obviously observing everything in the world going on right now and in the United States, both in terms of geoeconomic as well as the corporate world with the influx of AI, they know things are changing left and right, nonstop. There's a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, disruption, ambiguity. And people talk about leaders have to be able to handle a lot of challenges in the past. Well, now it's a different world. It's constant change. It's constant disruption. And a lot of people that may not have been in that type of environment for many years are experiencing things anew, a lot harsher, a lot more extreme. And how you manage it is all the world in terms of how you handle your day and how you feel about it as a leader and as a person. You can either play the victim or go, okay, I'm going to work through this and optimize my situation, just like you said.
Yeah, recently I had a guest that talked to us about the idea that her big theme was leading in the world of uncertainty. And one of the points she made that I thought was very wise and very helpful is that when we deal or look at things like ambiguity and uncertainty, we often, a business will go into the defensive mode. They will take out their playbook for how to manage a downturn,
Mm,
thinking, this is temporary. We're going to just hunker down. We're going to make some reductions and cuts, and we're going to, wait for it to turn around. But the point my guest was making is uncertainty doesn't necessarily turn around. It becomes a new normal sometimes,
yeah.
and it's more than just taking out your downturn playbook to strategize and set a course for the uncertainty you might be facing. So if nothing is more monumental of a change to a business is that if a CEO wakes up one day and all of the signals and all of the metrics and all the things they're used to looking at don't exist or have run away, what do you do?
Absolutely. As you said, uncertainty is really rampant now, even for companies that are used to being able to project how they're going to do. I'm sure you heard a lot of people, I think even Warren Buffett talked about the fact that every with the tariffs and everything, companies can't even guess how they're going to do and what their numbers are. And so a lot of times what they do is they retreat into safety mode. I've got a lot of clients that I coach, leadership clients, that their whole thing is, yeah, our company froze everything and we're not moving forward and we're standing by and watching. And one of the things I always talk to them about is what you can do is control what you can control. And part of that is not retreating and going into panic mode and saying, hey, we've got to keep moving forward. We've got to understand that this is going to be our life, our work, our career for years to come with everything. And instead of, as I say, playing the victim, surviving, flying by the seat of your pants, you can say, all right, I'm going to have a strategy and a path, and I'm going to keep moving forward. Yes, things are going to be coming at me from a million different directions that I cannot control, but I'm going to feel some sense of ownership, some sense of having a say in what my life and career is going to be like as much as you can moving forward. And that's all you can do.
So, what other aspects of the concept of needing to lead in what does certainly feel like a new age? What are some of the other elements of traditional leadership that you see changing?
Absolutely. I think one of the things are every leader nowadays has to be a project manager, a program manager, portfolio manager, whatever you want to call it, because the day-to-day tactical execution of just plugging away isn't the norm anymore. There's so many things coming in so quickly to leaders and their teams. They got to be able to manage a lot of things going on and feel a sense of structure about it, organization about it, feel like they're not just playing firefighter and reactive problem solver. I always tell them, you got to get out of the hero mode and the martyr mode and say, I'm going to be intent and purposeful on how I go about this, and I'm going to be more structured. I'm going to have a strategic direction, a plan of how I go about it, and I'm going to methodically work on it every day and follow this process. Of course, you adjust and you course correct, but leaders nowadays, with the changes, they've got to be adaptable, agile. They've got to be able to spin on a dime and go, all right, new stuff coming in, changing priorities, different agendas. Let's put them into everything. Now we're going to keep plugging away and knock each one out and manage all these initiatives and these projects without constantly being surprised, frustrated, disgusted, flustered with all the stuff coming at you. You have to go into the day expecting the non-normal.
So many things in there, and I think about, I just recently released a book that I call "Stop Leading on Empty," and it was based on my own collection of anecdotal experience with my clients over the last 12 to 18 months of people showing up just expressing and kind of a sense of exhaustion. They're just and it's different than classic burnout. It's not that they've lost the desire to go to work. They just, the tank is empty. I mean, the pressures of the day have just sucked them dry, and there's this sense of, how do I get my mojo back, and how do I get back in the game?
Yeah. It's a definite epidemic. I just had two clients yesterday that were talking about the same thing, and they said, I can't tell. Am I depressed? Am I what's got me so unmotivated? And I have to remind them it's okay to say this is a lot and this is overwhelming. But the difference between saying, hey, once again, I'm the victim and this is exhausting and the world is scary and my work is overwhelming, you've got to protect yourself. You have to say, okay, I understand that it's going to be pretty crazy in work today. It's going to be a busy week. I'm going to go into each day protecting my time, my energy, my sanity. I'm going to have reflective times. I'm going to not let people throw me a million different jobs, the crazy expectations, unfair agenda, unreasonable timelines, that kind of thing. Taking as much power back to yourself. So when you go to the end of the day or go to the end of your time in each day and each week, at the end of 5 o'clock, you go, I'm done. I turned it off. No matter how crazy it is. 5 o'clock on Friday night, you say, hey, had a good week.
Yeah.
And I'm turning it off. I've got to go to the wellness part of my day, the wellness part of my life, because they keep making it go into their regular day and it's becoming too overwhelming and they can't get their strength and energy back.
Yeah, not to get too deep into the weeds on that, but I'm reminded I had an executive once that I was dealing with, and he was expressing his own frustration of the sheer volume of requirements on his calendar. I get invited to all of these meetings, and he was going on and on and on, and I go, wait a minute, you're the senior executive. Who's inviting you to these meetings? And the long story short, what we came up with was the reality that the vast majority of his meetings, he was receiving invitations from all over the company because people were doing different things, different projects, different initiatives, where they would say, this thing is probably going to touch so and so's domain. Out of courtesy, I better invite him to our meeting so he knows what we're doing. And oftentimes he had no role in the meeting, no expectation of input. He was just being invited as a courtesy. So I encouraged him to try just being a lot more judicious about the meetings. Number one, because he was a senior executive, demand that they send you an agenda. You know, don't accept an invitation if it doesn't have an agenda attached to it. And if that's enough impetus for them to, clarify their thought, then now you've got information to make a decision. Do I really need to be the one at this meeting, or can I send one of my people to go? He started doing that, and in just a couple of weeks' time, I went back to see him again, and he was a different person. He was highly energized, highly motivated, giant smile on his face. And I said, what's going on? And he said, let me show you. And he turned his computer around. He goes, look at this calendar. And there was all this white space on it. And I said, that's awesome. I said, so I take it you've tried a few things. He goes, absolutely. He said, I eliminated 2/3 of the meetings I had on my calendar. I said, great. So what are you doing with it? He goes, he said, just since I saw you last, I was able to lean into 2 or 3 big deals we had going on. I landed a whole new $50 million contract. And he said, I wouldn't have had time to do that if I was still going to all these meetings.
Yeah.
And he was just giddy that he said, now I get to do what I'm supposed to be doing in this job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, there you go. Take ownership of it. And to your point, control the things you can control.
You're absolutely right. I love that story because I've had this thing, with several clients. I have a tool I provide them called Optimize Your Times and Your Tasks. And one of the things is talking about the meetings. And it's amazing. It's almost like they're looking for you. And these are, higher level executives to give them permission, as you say, to take ownership, to not accept the status quo, which a lot of times is self-imposed. Because when you talk to them about it, you said something that really hit with a lot of my clients. Did your boss demand that you go to those meetings? Has there been prerequisites or expectations that you go? Well, no, it's they're talking about something that might be connected. And if I had a dollar for the same thing where the clients go, I emptied half my schedule out. I've emptied two-thirds of it out. And that alone changes things. But when they also then say, I always talk about manage your inbound instead of letting, we call it people throwing things over the fence. Hey, they should own that. They should have that. Hey, here's another priority. Change that priority. When you're constantly managing it and taking ownership, like you say, it's almost like you give them as a coach, a consultant, permission to go, all right, I don't have to be working in this high stress, high expectation, knocking myself out mode. I can take control, even if my peer is working in a very reactive, stressed out way. Doesn't mean I have to, doesn't mean the culture's demanding I do it. So I love those stories.
Well, and in this particular culture, talk about legacy of a business and longstanding culture. A lot of these executives, as they moved up the chain, the number one yardstick they used was what the guy before them did. How did he or she operate in the role? And I had a chance to deal with quite a number of executives at this company. I think it was 25 over about a 3-year period, and it was inherent. It was everywhere. It permeated the organization, and I started asking people the question, "Where'd you get that idea? Why have you embraced that as a standard?" Well, that's what the guy before me did. And I'm like, so what?
Yeah.
So what? Do you really see the value in repeating that approach or that method? And a lot of times they would think about it and they'd go, no, not really. And come to think of it, I didn't like working for him because he was that way. And now here I am. I'm doing exactly what they were doing. I wonder if my people like working for me, you know?
You're so right. It's they have these expectations they've thrown on themselves from what they observed of others, or they feel people expects from them that they should be seen as the harried boss that's hair's on fire kind of thing and got a million things on their plate instead of the calm, cool, collected, methodical boss that can calmly go through the work week and have everybody else be strategic and intentional and not play, fighting fires all day. They almost feel like they have to show that commitment and dedication as being someone that's ready to put their head through a wall because they're so stressed out. It's a funny thing, like you say, they learn from others and they teach. That's one of the things we talk about too, is are you teaching that to your team? Does your team feel they don't feel safe to say, hey, I'm at capacity. I'm already working on 5 priorities. You're throwing me a 6th one. Have you created this whole feeling that we all got to run around like chickens with our heads cut off because it's kind of dominant? And when I ask, I'll say, is that a culture thing? Yeah, it's kind of been that way. Do they tell you you have to be that way? Has somebody demanded it? No, I kind of, I feel like I have to do it to, stay up with the Joneses. And I said, well, the Joneses aren't happy either. They're stressed and not having much of a work-life
Yeah.
balance. So
Yeah.
stop the cycle.
So back to kind of your central experience in history and change management. I've always had a perception that I think change management and project management kind of go hand in hand, and it's almost maybe almost a Siamese twin kind of deal. They're not just they don't just look identical. They actually share some common DNA, and there's some element to that. What is your experience in that aspect of reality for folks?
Yeah, it's you hit on a really good point. In this day and age, and I know I talked about this a little earlier, leaders have to be good at managing not just projects, but major enterprise initiatives, depending on their role and everything. But it's anybody that knows anything about change management, it's called the people side of change. Project management has tended to be considered the technical side of change. But even if you're talking about a big ERP implementation, you're still dealing with people. So the project managers, the technical people have to have change management skills a lot of times. And if it's not a bigger company, they have to do both. Like you said, they Siamese twins. They've got to be able to handle the human side of it, handle the technical side of it, and handle the project management, which is, I think it's a third tool in that. You got to understand technical, project management, and people management. And a lot of the companies nowadays, for a big period of time, and it's still out there. In Charlotte, we have all the big banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, used to be Wachovia, obviously. We've got a bunch of banks and tons of businesses, and there is change management and project management jobs everywhere. One of the things I noticed when I was at Wells Fargo at the end, new executive comes in, he's wanting to reduce costs and all that. He starts getting rid of all the change management people and saying the project managers, the technical managers should be able to do the change management themselves. So today's leader has to be able to do both sides of the fence, understand both parts of it. I agree with you 100%. It's very much mixed now.
Yeah. And in all things, as with all things, there are degrees of what's appropriate and what's overkill. And I know I had my own experience with a major project at Bank of America, and you're right, there were armies of change management, project management folks that were lined up to work with my group that had been hired as outside consultants to come in. And my funny story was the early days of the project launch. I'm a common sense guy. I'm a leadership powered by common sense, right? So my project brief deck for senior leadership was 4 pages. And I pitched that and I presented that first round of meetings, and I got feedback that wasn't enough. I wasn't telling enough of the story, and I'm going, what did you miss? What did you not get out of what I reported? Well, we got it all, but your deck is just a little thin. And I said, well, again, what do we need? What do you think you need? If you can tell me you're missing something, I'll be happy to accommodate. But in my own experience, this tells the story. I've given you everything you need to know about the status of where we're going. And they go, well, no. And then we got into a kind of an ongoing, it was a friendly discussion, a little bit of the agree to disagree. And I said, all right. I said, I'm game. Why don't you show me an example of one of your other projects where you just loved the reporting out that was happening? And they came up with this 60-page deck. And I said, and how long does it take you to do your weekly and monthly status reports with 60 pages of content? And who's administering this and what? And then we got into a friendly debate. They had been through one of the big major acquisitions of the day on the heels of the financial crisis, and they had absorbed a giant book of business that was not a pretty book of business. And it wasn't going well. And I said, where's your deck for that project? Let me take a look at that. In other words, a deck doesn't make the project.
Well, you know what's funny about that, Doug? I couldn't agree with you more. After I got a little more experience and quite honestly, a little less patience and a little more confidence, I would was always amazed when I go into these companies, whether I came as a consultant or a full-time employee, and how much their whole premise of what they thought you were doing as a change management, as a project management, is how nice your decks were, how you were presenting it so they could show it to the leaders. Hey, we're doing this, we're on top of this. And anybody that's been in any kind of project management course or change management course, obviously there's methodologies. There's the famous, change management program. And one of the things as you get going, you realize a lot of it's never used. You're going through them to keep the company happy, and they can feel like on the face, hey, we're doing all these nice steps and it's really flashy. We've got nice reports and we've got nice stakeholder analysis and we got nice readiness assessments and all that kind of stuff. And you create them and nobody'd ever look at them again. And I remember several times where I came in as either a smaller consulting company that I worked with, or when I came in as a full-time employee, where they would hire the big name consulting companies. And part of the people's jobs, and it was always the youngest kids straight out of a very nice college, their job was just making presentations all day, creating nice decks. And we used to talk about, you said it yourself, is okay, that's not necessary. We're overdoing it. We're making it complex. I love your thing about common sense, your whole concept on that. I've used this a couple times with my clients. Common sense things not commonly done. And we used to talk about the fact of, okay, let's make sure this provides real value. As we're going through this change, it's going to be value to the organizations, value to the people on the project team, value to the people that are being impacted, because there's enough complexity, enough expectations. Let's make it have real value and keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's exactly the approach I was trying to assert to them. And to your point, yeah, it involves probably some years of experience, getting that level of confidence and certainty about what you're doing, knowing what you're doing, knowing where the buttons are, and trying to optimize and create the most value. And I did even at one point. They kept arguing about the slide deck thing, and I said, fine, would you authorize in my budget a full-time person to develop these slides, and I'll be happy to support that. But it's I didn't say it literally like this, but my thought was, it's not really I don't have the bandwidth and I don't have the time to do all that fluff that you want in your deck. And some of those pages, they didn't even change period over period. They weren't even moving. Those, if they were meters on a big machine, they wouldn't even be moving. And so it's like, why spend the time and energy on it?
Exactly. And in this day and age, going back to, the constant change and uncertainty, you have to find ways to say, how am I going to stay focused on providing the best value with the least amount of fluff and extra work to impress my coworkers, impress the bosses above me, and say, let's just stay focused on the things that are going to help us as a company and as employees and as leaders to keep moving forward and to grow, even when all chaos is breaking on or breaking out around me. You have to find a way to go, all right, let's keep working on the value, not on the fluff.
Yeah. And one of the, I think, challenges in coming to the conclusion of the value elements of things, I think we have this constant tug of war between time and value, time and money on things. And, some people go to the quick math and they say, well, for every man hour we spend, it's going to cost us X $100. And that becomes the metric for resource allocation. But in reality, I always believe there's another correlation that needs to be checked out, and that is when you identify a task and you say, all right, this is going to be, and let's talk project management speak for a minute. This is an item on the critical path of our project. So in other words, it's got to get done. You can't avoid it. It's necessary and important, but Then you start sort of scoping the level of effort, the time and the money it's going to take to get there. But then you have to dovetail the real value that it's going to produce for the greater good. And I think too often, my experience anyway, is we short side or we stop after we've put the dollar value on it and we said, okay, this is good. But it's kind of like the proverbial let's spend a dollar to save a dime.
Mhm.
And I think that correlation part of it is a very critical piece in today's world, that people can easily get spun up and make commitments on time, energy, and money that aren't really producing the dollar outcome or the gain they want to achieve. Whereas they've got other things that could be done that go straight to that, but they never get the allocation of the resources to help make it happen.
Absolutely. There's too much of that that's been going on for too many years, and nobody wants to question it. You said it yourself. They take on a role and they saw the boss before them that got promoted, how they were managing the role, and or they go to another company and take a position and look at the job description and kind of say, okay, I got to do what I see here as being what my role is supposed to be. One of the things when I'm helping clients that are saying, I'm trying to figure out a direction. I'm a new leader in this department. I'm trying to figure out what I should prioritize, what I should focus my team on, what work I should be focused on. And I tell them, once again, back to I think, like you say, common sense and keep it simple. I say, what is the value that you and your team are supposed to provide to the organization right now in the leaders' minds and your stakeholders' mind? What do they consider the deliverables that you're supposed to be providing? And if that is the accepted, then what work are you doing specifically towards the value of achieving that value for the whole department and deliverables, instead of all these ancillary things you're doing or the person before you was doing that you're trying to figure out how to prioritize? And you've heard the thing, other people's agendas are not your priority. You have to sit there and say, okay, we at the beginning of the year are going to do our little strategic planning session of our business unit, saying what is the value we're supposed to provide, what is the growth we want to have, what's our present state, what's our ideal state. So what work, activities, tasks are we all going to work on this year? And we're going to stay focused on that. And every time somebody sends us other stuff, throws other things on top of it, tries to take us in a million different directions, we're going to go, all right, no, we got to stay focused. We will adjust, but we're not going to be constantly inundated and overwhelmed by all the stuff that's coming with all the change and uncertainty. So focused on that value makes it easier for you and your team.
And one of the aspects of change that does happen, I mean, companies are famously always reorganizing and reshaping their company structures. And I'm thinking of a big case that I was involved in, that a large global brand had decided they had what was essentially seven verticals going on, and they decided they were going to cut it down to four. And they weren't cutting out function, but they wanted to try to find the economies in the redundancy of some of the senior leadership expenses and requirements, and that there was some logic for these roll-ups happening. And I and a team of other coaches I work with, we were commissioned to come in and help the leaders kind of work through this massive change event. And one of the common threads that really emerged quickly was the idea that for these newly constituted leadership teams that were at all levels of the organization, everybody, all the deck chairs had gotten moved around pretty substantially. The fundamental question for the new team was, what should a win look like?
Mm.
If we're going to, and it came down to, if we're going to deliver value, what does a win look like? Do we even know? And kind of consistent with their cultural legacy as a business, First couple of meetings I got to sit in on, the teams were like, they were like immediately had their sleeves rolled up and they were just diving in almost transactionally talking about what was going on. And I know with the group I was working with, I challenged the senior leader after observing that a while. I said, your team doesn't know what a win looks like. They haven't, under the new rules of engagement, they haven't stopped to think about what a real, value add contribution is going to be from this group. And I said, do you know what it is? And he thought a minute and he goes, no, I really don't. And I said, well, maybe that's what you guys need to be doing right now is you need to be coming together and collaborating on the definition of what your highest and best use can be, your best contribution to this new organization. And he said, damn, that's exactly what we need to do. So there was a series of changed agendas in these leadership meetings over the next probably 60 days. And they came up with a crystal clear vision of what they could do to really, add value. And then they could roll their sleeves up and say, now let's go get it.
Absolutely. You just said the word that is so key for anybody leading a major change initiative. And I know it's a buzzword and there will be some people that roll their eyes. It's vision. And the reason those of us involved in big change initiatives are so very specific in wanting to get clients to determine what that is going to be. It's because the teams and the people, all those impacted, have to have a North Star of why are we doing this? And you said something that it reminded me, a very quick anecdote. I came out of this meeting where everybody was going back and forth and saying, hey, I thought we were working on this. We were focused on this. This should be a priority and all the same thing. And this guy came out that I know he would say it after every meeting. He would always say, what are we doing? What are we doing? And what he meant is what are we going for? We don't have a specific vision that we're all staying aligned on. And he said, the leadership, they just come up and they read an article or they look in Harvard Business Review or they see something in a video on a leadership thing or something. And they come in and say, I want to do this now. The CEO throws this out and everybody starts scrambling and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the things we talk about is until you say we're aligned on this value proposition, like you said, that we're going for and we're staying focused on, and we'll adjust and course correct, then everybody knows what work they should stay on, what priorities, what agendas, that kind of thing. But as one guy said to me, he goes, they keep moving the goalposts on us.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've had that same thing with clients saying, Dan, I don't know how to handle the constant changing of priorities and agendas. It's confusing me. It stresses me out. I'm a very linear black and white person, and this is not comfortable, which is the era we're in right now. So you have to learn how to deal with that.
Which I think gets us back to the whole idea, what are leaders to do in this new era? And I'm a big advocate of potentially the very first job priority a leader has is to create clarity. And, it might be tied to the vision, yes. So you got to have the vision to be able to be clear about what that is, yes. But when we are beginning to talk about the idea of, all right, all the planning's over, all the other things are over, now let's turn our focus on the work that needs to be done. If a leader cannot provide that clarity of what is the next right thing to do, people are going to flounder. And the symptomatic observation is that people don't start doing things wrong. They just start doing nothing because they feel frozen. If they don't know what the right thing might be, I'm convinced after all my years, people don't inherently show up wanting to do bad work. Now, you got a few folks in the mix that are nefarious, or maybe they have a criminal mind or something like that, and that's a whole different discussion. But your mainstream workforce doesn't want to show up and do something bad at work. That's not how they're wired.
I agree with that 100%. And as you well know, Doug, when people have asked me, about leading change, they always talk about, wow, that has got to be a tough job. That's got to dealing with all these people that are not happy about the changes they're going through and all that. They've got to be such a challenge. And I always say to them, no, it's typically the leaders at the top. And they go, what do you mean by that? They're the ones that are advocating. I said, no, they advocate for it. But a lot of times they don't know how to provide a clear vision, or they don't want to be the one that says, here's what it's going to be. Because if it doesn't work, and so it becomes this cycle where the leaders at the top are changing priorities and changing directions. And the employees below, like you're saying, the impacted employees, they're going, I'm putting my hands up. I can't follow. I don't know what they want. So I'm not sticking my neck out and saying that I'm going to lead this or I'll take this initiative. I'm just going to sit by and let them screw everything up until they tell us exactly what to do. And it becomes this vicious cycle. So as you know, as a consultant, you spend a lot of time when you're talking with the top leadership saying, you may not be comfortable with this, but you got to decide on a clear vision and commit to it at least for a year, maybe 3 to 5, you know?
Totally. Well, Dan, this has been great. I think we're about up on time. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you.
Oh, thank you. My company is called Impactful Performance. So you can go to my website at impactfulperformance.com. My email address is dan@impactfulperformance. And obviously you can find me on LinkedIn under my company name, Impactful Performance. And I also have a tool that I provide people, a free tool, a lead magnet, if you want to call it, impactfulperformance.com/optimize. And it's the time and task tool that we talked about earlier, because the reason I really talk about that one first is leaders can't be intentional, strategic, controlled until they set themselves up for success by optimizing their time and their tasks and getting into a approach in their day that they can be strategic and intentional. Just like you said, like the leader that finally had time on his calendar. So those are the different ways you can find me and the free tool that I provide people. So thank you so much for your time today, Doug. I really appreciate it. Great conversation.
I agree. It was a good time, Dan. Thank you again. And folks, we're going to have all those links in the show notes. So be sure, find yourself a safe place if you're listening on your favorite streaming service right now, but check out those links when you get a chance. And I do like to remind you, we got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out our archives, leave me some comments. Let me know if you have an idea, a theme, or a topic you'd like us to get into, or you know a person that ought to be a guest. Maybe that's you, but just drop me a line, let me know. Would love to chat. And I think for now, that's about it. We're going to wrap up, say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.